Hey, Ghost Machine fans, this one's for you. Welcome to episode 15 of the Ghost Machine Fans Podcast. We are back for our second creator interview. I'm Nick, and I'm joined as usual by my special friend, Snoggle, also known as Becky. Becky, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing excellent. I'm on my second cup of coffee, and I'm ready for this episode. It's going to be an exciting one.
It is going to be an exciting one, and it's fortuitous that you mention your second cup of coffee and that I'm referring to us as recording in the morning, because in order to introduce our guest this time, I'd like to share some of his bona fides with you, and he is in the UK, where it is currently not the morning. Our guest this time is a world-renowned comic book artist and British native. He began his career at the young age of 17 at Marvel, UK. Later, he helped co-create The Authority with Warren Ellis at Wildstorm and went on to pencil The Ultimates at Marvel with Mark Millar, as well as many, many other well-known works over the years. His work and designs have also been seen in animated films, television, and major feature films, such as J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. He's the co-founder of Ghost Machine and the co-creator of Simon Pure, aka Redcoat, Mr. Bryan Hitch. Bryan, how are you today, sir?
I'm very well, actually, thank you.
Fantastic. We're very, very excited to have you here. We're very excited to have the opportunity to interrogate you. Right before we do that, we always do a shout out, and this one is one that I think, Bryan, you might have heard a little bit about as well. This time, it is to Mr. Adam Gary, who's the founder of the Ghost Machine Comics Fans Facebook page. And that Facebook page just hit 1,000 members the other day. That Facebook page is extremely new. It was started only about a month or two before all the ongoing series started earlier this year. And Adam spearheaded that initiative. He's got a whole group of admins and content creators that support him now. And it's just super exciting for the group to have grown so fast. So shout out to them. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
So we have a gamut of questions prepared for Mr. Hitch today that are going to cover the scope of his career and hopefully help us learn a good bit more about Redcoat and Ghost Machine. First one that we have for you, sir, is you were given your first paid work in comics at the age of 17 years old. Tell us what your journey into the comic book industry was like at such a young age.
Brief, really, because I was expecting it to take an awful lot longer to get a job. I was actually, I'd finished what you guys call high school. And back then it was optional whether you stayed on until you were 18 or not. It isn't now, but back then it was. But my plan was to go, the city town where I grew up had a very good local art college. And the plan was to go there and do that. But I had to be 17, so I had to wait another year because 16 when I left school. So I prepared some samples and sent them to Marvel UK, which at that point the editors were Richard Starkings and Simon Furman. They were all producing weekly comics based on licensed products. So we had Transformers, Thundercats, which is the one I really wanted to do, and Action Force, which was essentially the European G.I. Joe characters. And Richard basically gave me a 2-part story. I was 16 when I did that, when I sent the samples away, and Richard gave me a 2-parter to draw straight away, and then just told me he'd have full-time work for me afterwards. It wasn't as easy as that because there was all sorts of adjustments to make from going from being a teenage fan to actually working under professional conditions, something I think I've probably only got used to in about the last 5 or 6 years. But back then it was Yeah, I think learning to deal with people, learning to deal with deadlines, actually working from somebody's script, there was all sorts of stuff to overcome, but they were really generous with their time and enthusiasm. And so there were a few of us actually. You know, Doug Braithwaite was a year older than me. He's a year older than me. He started the same time I did. So he was 17 or 18 when he started too. So there was definitely, spearheaded by Richard Starkings, there was definitely a move to generate and nurture as much new talent as possible. And I would say partly because we were cheap, but I was realizing the other day, actually, when we weren't, because looking at the rates we were all paid back then, this is like 1987, and adjusted for inflation, they're actually higher, far higher as starter rates than many of the full-time pro rates are today. So that shows you that the industry hasn't really kept pace with the with worldwide inflation in terms of payments. But anyway, that's another argument for another day. But I wanted to draw comics ever since I saw Superman the movie is kind of the kind of the benchmark thing for me. It was 78. I just started buying DC comics because they were on sale. They were the only ones I knew about. I didn't know about Marvel comics, but DC comics were on sale in the newsagent next door to the local cinema. So I'd go and see, and this was in the days when movies were on. If they were successful, they'd be on for months and months and months. So I just remember the summer of 1978, literally going to see Superman the movie every single weekend. And instead of using the money my mum gave me to buy sweets in the cinema, I would keep it and I'd buy the comics in the shop next door. And I just copied. I loved drawing obsessively, so I just copied all those comics, the Kurt Swan stuff, Jim Apato's Batman stuff, Don Newton stuff, Don Detective, Jerry Ordway's stuff, which I adored. When that came up in the early 80s, I remember that coming through, the All-Star Squadron stuff. So, that was it. When I think about it, there was really only 8-9 years between me starting that process with Superman the movie and being a professional comic book artist, which doesn't seem a long time today because I'm 54 and 8 years is no time at all. But it's funny to think of it in those terms. So that's what I mean when I say it was short. It doesn't seem like it was a long period of time going from being an 8-year-old kid to being a 16, 17-year-old professional.
I can't imagine the adjustment, what it was like actually in the workplace, like how you had
that was home. It was I was just pleased not to be going to school.
Oh, so you didn't have to be in a setting where you were around like other working professionals. No, you were just given the work and then you had to deliver on it.
Yeah, I mean, Marvel was based in London. I was up in the far north of England, so we were a whole country apart. So I'd get the train down every now and again to do socials, like the office Christmas party, and that's where I first met Dougie, the 87 Christmas party. But actually, my hometown in the far north had 2 other professional comic book artists. The first one I met when I was about 14 was Steve Parkhouse. Steve had been working as a professional for a very long time by that point, and he was married to Annie Havacray, who was, apart from being the ceramics teacher at the local art college, was also a comic book letterer. So there was that, and Geoff Senior, who drew all the Transformers stuff with Simon Furman back in the 80s as well at Marvel UK. Geoff was based in Carlisle as well, so there was a small comic book community there too.
And when you say Dougie, you're referring to Doug Braithwaite?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I really love his work on Valiant stuff specifically.
Oh yeah, he's terrific. He was one of the guys. He was such a good draftsman from a very early age. He just really sort of understood structure in a way that the rest of us didn't.
Well, we alternate when we interview people. So the next one is for Becky to read to you.
In the late 90s, you intended to exit comics to pursue a career in film and television. Shortly thereafter, you met Warren Ellis and created The Authority, which you've spoken of as a lightning bolt moment for your career. How does the current storm of Ghost Machine compare to that lightning bolt that was your work with Warren?
I suppose it's equally seismic.
Nice.
It wasn't that I wanted to leave comics to pursue film and TV. It was a viable alternative with the skills and talents that I had back then. What led to that was personal frustrations about I wasn't very good at meeting deadlines. I wasn't enjoying the work particularly. I wasn't getting the jobs I wanted to get. I was being overlooked constantly for stuff. I was asking for this, that, and the other, and I was just being told I either wasn't good enough or I wasn't big enough. And eventually you just think, well, what's the point?
Mhm.
Got in touch with Brett Blevins via a mutual friend, and he at that point was doing the storyboards for all the Bruce Timm superhero shows, and he said that they'd be more than happy to kind of bring me in. Just need to do a few kind of sounds good work in that particular thing. And for me, stuff's always been about storytelling, not drawing. I often struggled with the drawing. The drawing was a frustrating thing for me because I wasn't as good as I wanted to be, and I'm not excited by drawing pictures. I'm excited by telling stories. So I'm not really fond of pin-ups. Covers can be fun just as a bit of a single image hoot, but I'm not driven by the need to draw pin-ups. You know, if the image isn't servicing the story in some way, if the characters aren't acting, that's the stuff that comes alive for me. The drawing is the thing I kind of have to put up with in order to get to the finished result so that anybody can read it. And the storytelling is the thing I find the easiest. It's if I have any kind of natural ability, it's that, not the drawing. The drawing's the thing I've had to work hard to improve over the years. So all those frustrations really meant I thought, I'm not getting, and it's been 12 years at this point. I'm not getting where I want to go. I'm possibly not good enough, and I'm certainly not being able to deliver, but either in terms of the quality I want to hit or being so obsessed with trying to improve that, I'm constantly missing deadlines. I'm not being able to just deliver the work. And I'm being told that that's an issue as well. And the thing that appealed about the storyboarding stuff was that it's not about finished drawings. It's about just communication, and it doesn't have to be polished. So it meant I can just focus on the storytelling thing that mattered the most to me. But I did need a bit of money to kind of set me up as well. So the plan was I got offered this Stormwatch thing that apparently was already in trouble because the artist on it was so late. So when I came on board, I was turning books and half issues around in days. But it was the first time I met with Warren. I sort of got in touch with Warren. By that point, I was living in London or around London, and Warren's similarly south. And although we didn't meet up, we did speak on the phone a bit. And I didn't know what it was, just something clicked with us. He was getting frustrated with other artists not being able to do what he's asking. Not that he was asking, these weren't Alan Moore level scripts where everything's in horrific detail. Far from it, at least my experience with Warren, far from it. In fact, they're very open and often on authority. He just wouldn't give me panel descriptions, just give me the dialogue because that's all he needed for the beats, and he knew I'd be able to deliver the pictures. So we did develop a very good shorthand as the more we worked together, and that continued on to Batman's Grave many years later too. But the Stormwatch thing was, I think, but I was starting to develop ideas about how I wanted to tell the stories. At least, like I've been very influenced by a lot of artists. And I think that was limiting too, in I was only letting myself draw the way I thought they would draw and making choices they would make. And it was about that time, I think possibly led by the frustrations I was just describing. I was starting to think much more about how I wanted to do it and trusting myself a bit more, probably maturing a bit as well. By that point, I was 27, 28, 27, 12 years in the business by that point. But something clicked on the Stormwatch stuff for both of us. It wasn't there yet, but we could feel there was something. Warren liked how I interpreted what he was writing. And for the first time, I felt I was being given stuff that just made sense to me. It was just like somebody's playing the right harmonies to the tune I'm singing, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, Warren was supposed to go off and replace in his schedule, after Stormwatch, the book he was doing with John Cassaday. Planetary, that was his replacement in his schedule. And Wildstorm had been happy with what I'd been doing, so they were trying to get me to do some other stuff. They offered me all of the Alan Moore books, none of which appealed just for it. It felt as great as Alan Moore is, and I've really enjoyed reading a lot of Alan's stuff over this from childhood to professional life. I had read Alan's scripts before, and for me, it just felt like a list of instructions, not a story. And there were some really good illustrators and comic artists that have done some extraordinary work with Alan. Pretty much everybody has worked with him. But for me, it didn't make me feel like I wanted to draw the picture. All the storytelling was done, if you know what I mean. It was in the script. So what do I bring to this? And if it's just about drawing, I'm not the right guy, because that's not my skill. So, I was talking to Warren about that on the phone, and then, and I said, they thought that they'd be able to find Scott Lobdell would write something for me if I wanted to stay at Wildstorm. Anyway, Warren rang me back half an hour later, and whilst he was ringing, this one-page thing came through the fax machine, and it just said The Authority. And he said, I've just been thinking, I can't let you work with Scott Lobdell. I'll find time to write something else. I was thinking about a sequel to Stormwatch. So he said, just, this group of characters we'll throw in Mr. Majestic, and we'll use Jenny Sparks. And and then he said, I've got this idea for a character called the Engineer, who's got kind of liquid blood nanotech blood that can turn into, so she's kind of like Iron Man. And they just kind of big budget stories that save the world. 3 blockbuster stories across a year. And that was about the year things like Armageddon were coming out, and it was all very blockbustery. So I threw in the whole idea about the spaceship, the carrier, and that size of it. And we threw in some other, they're talking about the characters. They're going to invade this alternative Earth, and then they're going to fight back. And I said, well, if they're going to fight back, why don't they attack the carrier on horseback? Because it's just, so we just started riffing like this, and suddenly we had the year worked out, and comics were alive again. But that was coming from a lot of frustrations. And the same thing with Ghost Machine, to come back to the point of your original question. Mm-hmm. A lot of why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what we're doing are, for a lot of us, all built on similar kinds of frustrations with, for me, I feel like I've been repeating myself a lot. I felt like I'd gone from being a contributing storyteller to an art robot, where I'm simply just delivering pictures to somebody's lists of instructions. And it grew out of lots of conversations over many years, probably 3 years since Geoff and I first started talking about what became Redcoat, and he'd already done Geiger with Gary by that point. But yeah, it might have been initially kind of driven by that frustration, but really what powered it and made it happen was everybody's passions for creating new material and telling stories, and the freedom to do those things. And everybody's a professional. They want to get the stories done. They want to get them out there. We want to make great comics. So mutual passion, mutual interests, mutual respect. We've just become quite a family, actually. It's been terrific as time has developed. And we want to make it work because none of us want to do anything but this now for the rest of our careers. This is it, as far as we're concerned. So, yeah, kind of amazing, really.
Just so you know, like us as the readers, we can feel that passion. So it's just really exciting, because I know you guys have been doing it for a long time. And I think any adult can relate to, like, in their field of work, feeling dull for a bit of time. So it's like rewarding for you guys, and we can like feel that through the work. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad it's coming through. It's certainly driven by passion and enthusiasm. I absolutely, there isn't a day I'm not genuinely having a great time telling these stories about Simon, and it's little moments between him and Albert or him and Benny, just that the characters are so alive. They literally dictate what I do, or at least I can draw, and I do a layout and think, no, that's not right, because that isn't what Simon would do in that moment. He'd be actually doing this instead. And even if it's not something that's overtly obvious, I think it comes through enough that it feels like you're watching these characters behave rather than looking at pictures of them. At least that's how it feels to me.
It's a wonderful way to put it, that we are watching them in their fishbowl behave. That is absolutely the case.
They are genuinely alive to Geoff and I. We were talking about when we were at Philadelphia together a couple of months back, and we were talking about what was going to be a scene at the end of issue 6, and it's become the whole of issue 7. Actually, this scene. I'm not going to say anything about the scene because it's quite a powerful thing. But we got so emotional about this scene and talking about it, almost acting it out between us about how this thing's become the whole issue and why, and giving it the time to breathe. And you can only do that because you know that the characters need that space and that time to act and react and understand and process. And what would have otherwise just been a little button epilogue has become this really super powerful. We had us both almost in tears talking about what was happening in the issue, because the emotion was so strong about what was going on. You think, that's when you've really, for creators, you've hit something, is because the characters live. they aren't something you're just writing or creating anymore. They exist, and the story's not being driven as much by plot. It's being driven by their choices, their emotions, because they're alive in that respect.
That's really neat that I'm going to read issue 6 and know that what is going to be issue 7 was just going to be a little button up to issue 6 now. It's going to give me a totally different perspective as a fan. It'll make me enjoy it on another level.
I'm cliffhanging on issue 3.
Right? Yeah.
So issue 5 goes to the printers next week, if I remember rightly. So
yeah,
that's so exciting.
You guys are churning them out. So you talked about a lot of how it Ghost Machine, it's different because you don't feel like you're just following somebody's instructions. So it's very clear that artists who work with Geoff Johns do more than just draw pictures or just follow instructions. The process seems to be more collaborative. Can you tell us what your dynamic is like with Geoff?
Well, it is collaborative, and I've found Geoff to be fairly uniquely collaborative. The interesting thing I realized, I was having this conversation with Frank quietly a few weeks ago, actually, that the experiences on Authority, while working with Warren, Mark on Ultimates, and Robert Venditti on Hawkman, and now Geoff on this, they are the best experiences I've ever had working in comics. And it's no coincidence that they come because they're collaborations. They're not just me working as an art robot. And I think that just comes because I'm involved in the storytelling. I'm not just drawing the pictures, and I say that storytelling is the passion for me. It's where the interest is. But some writers just don't want to work that way at all. And that's often been my experience. So, Geoff could just write the book without my input, but he doesn't have to have the input, but he wants it. And it stops being the divide between story and art then diminishes, and you get something where the two blend because we're both so involved in each other's kind of areas. Geoff writes very visually. I'm even thinking about dialogue, and when Geoff does the final dialogue pass, we always go back and forth until we're both happy with it. So that there's complete collaboration on all fronts for us. And that is unusual. I certainly didn't have that with even Mark and Warren, just the level of collaboration I have with Geoff. But it's a co-creation, but Geoff takes that very seriously. And I think just our working relationship has developed because the dynamic works and it improves what we're doing. And Geoff's open to that. I'm open to that. So it's become far more collaborative than probably anything else I've ever done.
And you can tell with the pacing and with the placement of so many of the panels that it's clearly like it can't just be somebody sending something off to somebody in another office to draw it. It just doesn't, it's not possible. Becky, it's your turn.
Brian, you said in recent videos that the beginning and end of Redcoat are written, but the journey in between is not, which is ultimately kind of the fun part. What made you decide to structure the book that way?
Originally, actually, it was going to be a series of miniseries. And I think we could have told Simon's complete arc in, say, the equivalent of 3 movies, 3 big 7-volume series, for instance. We could have done a beginning, middle, and end because those points are kind of fairly clear for the character, where he starts, where his pivots are, and how we know. We know what the last story is because we know when we reach that point, it won't be the end of Simon's story per se, but we'll have told the story we want to tell. Because then, for us, the interesting part of it's over. He's become this thing or this person, and the journey to that from where he starts is the story we want to tell. But very soon after starting discussions, as we were building up to what became Ghost Machine, and I was still working through my Marvel and DC work, and as we started talking about it, it became obvious to both of us that, I think more driven by me at that point than Geoff, that this had to be longer form. We had to let it breathe, decompress those moments a lot more, and realize that within those big moments, there are so many smaller stories that contribute to why those things happen, because that's what your life is like. And Simon is also a very long-lived individual. So and when you think about how long it feels for your life and all the changes you go through, the pivots that make your life, what it is at any given point,
Mhm.
Those aren't short stories. The more I thought there was more to tell, not just about Simon, but the history of America, even if it is a fantasy history. But there will be points to make about America, what it wanted to be, what it started out as, what it's become, where it might go. So those allegories are going to be there as well. But Simon's personal journey is also reflective of my own personal journey and Geoff's personal journey, emotionally speaking. What does it take? How do you learn from your mistakes? How long does it take? And how long does it take for you to grow from being, in my case, a certain type of youth growing through, in my case, fatherhood and relationships, and out the other side and a better person for it. This story is, albeit set against the backdrop of a fantasy America, this is Simon's personal therapy, if you like, this comic book.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't think that should be a rapid process. There were so many other smaller stories, and then we start talking about figures like the Bloody Benders, who are real figures in history. They murdered people. Then you start getting to Benedict Arnold's story as well. Albert Einstein, Simon meets him as a 13-year-old boy, but we know that Albert lives to 1955 in real life. So there's a lot of that story to tell. And then we start planning some other big stories that build out of just what if this happens and what if this happens, and suddenly you've got another arc and another arc. We're already plotting well into the 20s at the moment. We already know specifically what those issues and some much broader strokes, and you realize you're actually planning out, okay, we've already got 50 issues planned, so it doesn't take a long time to realize that that's a lot more than 3 7-issue miniseries. And why not? Because if we love doing this and we love telling these stories, so as long as people are still interested in reading them and we can sell enough to make it worthwhile, it will stay monthly for the next decade or so. And that's the plan. Walking Dead level of commitment here. So,
well, I feel like when you're reading it, you said you like storytelling, like how fun to be able to like work in that historical fiction area where you can kind of integrate and really go for a long time and have some fun with it.
We can now we know that the premise is that Simon doesn't die or doesn't stay dead. So
Yeah.
if you take out that specific drama from it, at least to a point, and that he became immortal in 1766 or 1776, and that he's still alive at the time of Geiger, and there are lots of adventures to tell, but that also means you can jump backwards and forwards across this 18th, 19th, 20th century. I think we both feel like it works best for us when it's not modern and not future. And I know there'll be element where he'll show up in Geiger at times, but for us, I think if we went past something that's obviously period, I think even the 60s might be too far or too close to present. But then that still gives you centuries worth of adventures against so many different historical settings that you can twist and lift to your own magical advantage. And this is a world Simon's already just been dropped into. This is a magical world of America that pre-exists Simon. It's like Harry Potter. The world's been around long before Harry Potter was born into it. And so that there's a lot Simon's discovering on these journeys. But just because issue 7 is in the decade that's in doesn't mean issue 8 can't jump back 100 years. Because for us, it's not just Simon's emotional journey. We want the readers to go on an emotional journey. So if Simon experiences something in issue 7 that requires a massive catharsis, issue 8 will be that catharsis, but it's as much for you as it is for the character. It could be a set 100 years before that event that required the catharsis in issue 7, and in issue 8 could be set 90 years before that. But for us as readers experiencing the story, we'll feel the catharsis that comes from issue 8 following issue 7, even though they don't follow each other year on year. But that's the nature of Simon's existence, is we can experience his story non-linearly.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And it gives you more flexibility creatively in a way.
Yeah.
So there have been many questions about Simon's coat. Its durability and hygiene over the years have come into question by many fans. Like this is a hotly, frequently debated Facebook subject, sir. We just think it looks cool, and we are okay with he just sews it back together a lot because, like the Hulk's pants, I mean, he's got to have his outfit. Like Geiger wears the same outfit all the time. We imagine that, who knows what that smells like. So we're just wondering if there's more to it than that, or if he just keeps it up and it's part of his identity and it's how we know who it is.
Well, do I answer this or not? Because to me, yes, there's absolute purpose in what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I don't know that it'll ever become a story point, specifically, maybe a line of dialogue at some point. Because there was talk initially, that the only thing that would be consistent would be the coat. He'd keep the coat, whatever time period he was in, and he'd just wear the coat. Because I could wear a coat like that and go out in a pair of jeans and I'd look all right.
Right.
So is that the only thing that's unique about it? And then the more I started working with it, so here's the scoop. There's no real kind of major reveal about this in terms of it's magical or some kind of plot device or anything like that.
Okay.
For me, because we're telling this story about a man who is at least initially unwilling or unable to change his own life, his own circumstances, to grow and develop. For me, keeping the costume the same is an outward representation of what's going on in Simon's head. So there'll be a point, I'm not going to say which issue, where for a period he's not wearing it because he's embraced some change. It also represents, I'm sure you've heard, the philosopher's axe, the idea that the ship of Theseus, basically. So the philosopher's axe, in a simple terms, is if your grandfather gives you an axe and at some point the handle wears out, you replace the handle. At some point the blade wears out and you replace the blade. Is it still the same axe your grandfather gave you? And there's no correct answer to that because it both is and it isn't. So this is also representative to me of the kind of the philosopher's axe idea that Simon, as well as his coat, I mean, it's been repaired and changed and he must have repaired it so many times over many hundreds of years that it can't possibly be the same coat that he was issued with when he joined the British Army. But it's still the same coat, and he has been born and reborn and killed and resurrected so many times. Is he still the same person? And again, these come back to answer the questions that we want to pose about Simon, is that how long does it take for him to embrace this experience he's been given and grow and change and improve as a human being? Now, it's essentially, as I said, therapy for Simon, set against the wondrous backdrop of a fantastical American history, an action adventure on, Pirates of the Caribbean, Indiana Jones, etc., etc. But at the same time, for us, there's a core character emotional journey here that his costuming does, for me, externalize, which is why I do it that way, why we don't change it, why I don't change it.
Well, that is way cooler than any magical explanation, I would say. So thank you. I think that when he has to embrace some sort of change or may briefly not be wearing the coat, it may be when he's wearing like a wizard's outfit of some kind. I'm just throwing it out there. I might be wrong. Might be
There's
right.
no pointy hats.
That's not what I said.
So we recently, I think it was about 5-ish episodes ago, we've been having our listeners mail us in questions. Okay. So this is actually a question from a listener. So this is from Nick Turton, who also is a New Zealander, who did a Redcoat cosplay and forged an axe of lies with his brother recently. Is it true that when you launched the Ultimates for Marvel with Mark Millar, no one showed up to a Comic-Con in New Zealand, so everyone went out drinking with the fans?
Well, I remember Mark going to it. I didn't go. I couldn't go. I remember that because I had to say no because we'd just had a baby. So that wasn't a good idea for me to be leaving Mrs. H with a baby. Anyway, it wouldn't. I don't remember Mark telling me, but it wouldn't surprise me because Mark was always going out for drinks with the fans at the shows in those days. He cultivated quite a following. Mark liked to form a club wherever he went. So yeah, it does ring a vague bell, but I don't know any details about it, I'm afraid, because it was 25 years ago and I wasn't there. So.
Oh my goodness, we I guess Mr. Churton and I, through the rumor mill, we thought you were there. We thought there was some epic Hitch Millar bar New Zealand story. But...
No, I've never been.
Well, Mr. Nick Churton he's in your neck of the woods right now. He's on a 30-day holiday visiting the UK. But
oh, nice.
We did really want to give him a shout out. He did do I don't know if you've seen it, but he did a really cool Simon Pure cosplay.
No, I haven't seen it.
Have you seen any of the pictures of the Acts of Lies that him and his brother actually forged one and they carved the symbols in it?
Oh, well, that's cool. No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, and they added some graphics. So I'll send you that material. And in the one for the Acts of Lies, his brother actually dressed up as Einstein too. So
Oh,
it's
that's hilarious.
so we've noticed just that Andrew Curry has worked with you on Redcoat since its start. So it must be fortuitous that he has joined the Ghost Machine exclusive crew. We were just wondering if you could briefly tell us about Andrew.
I've known Andrew since I moved down to London in 1992. So we've been friends since 92. And Andrew and I have worked together on and off numerous times. He inked the first half dozen issues of Ultimates back in the day. He did Hawkman. He inked Hawkman. He's inked odd things like a bunch of the Fantastic Four issues he inked. So we've worked together on and off for a while. So being monthly, I wasn't going to be able to pencil and ink it myself because as much as I do like to ink, I can't I can't maintain a level of interest. It's, as I say to you before, it's storytelling is the thing, and I can just about get through the penciling. But if I'm penciling and inking an issue as well, I feel like the drawing drags on too long, and I'd rather just pencil it and then move on to the next issue and keep it going that way. So I asked Andrew if he'd join the club, and just because it just made sense that he's going to be on the book as long as I'm on the book. So we invited him to join the company permanently, or at least, on a long-term basis. So it's not freelance anymore; it's salaried. Eva and Danny have the same partnership on Hyde Street. Andrew and I work well together. He lives locally, so we see each other all the time as we exchange pages, and it's a nice working arrangement. Plus, as I say, we've been friends for 30-something years now.
Well, it must be a lot of fun to be able to work with somebody like that.
Yeah, for me, it's an easy working relationship. I think I probably stress him out more than than he would like.
What are the main differences between working for a corporate entity and something independently owned?
Well, apart from a couple of instances where I've been under exclusive agreements with either Marvel or DC, I've been working for myself as a freelancer. I am my business and have been since I was 17. So working with Marvel and DC for all of those years, they weren't really an employer. They were a client, long-term clients, but not a corporate client. They were a corporate client, but I didn't work for a corporation or in corporate circumstances. So Ghost Machine, actually, although it's a company we co-founded and co-own, it's the first time I've actually been on a salary, so rather than freelance rates. So the big difference is realizing that you're simply not motivated by getting an invoice in any given week or month or what have you, and your focus is solely on the work and the creativity you're doing. And I suppose we are a corporation. We're a company, not a group of freelancers. So, that we have a proper company structure, and there are people that work purely on the business and executive side of stuff for us and with us. So it's different from the creator-owned model of previous things where you end up doing almost everything yourself, from marketing to the business to the accounting, all of that stuff. So we just really, the great thing about it is that although you sort of have to make corporate decisions from time to time, because that's part of how we set up, really all I have to do day in, day out is focus on what I enjoy most, which is making and telling great stories. The biggest difference is that, yeah, we're working for ourselves and for each other, because this is a cooperative as well, a creative cooperative. When we set the company up, we chose early on. So, Geoff, Gary, Jay, and I, in really beginning the process and getting the company underway and started and becoming what it is, there was a choice early on not to do it quite the way Image had done it last time, where there was each of their own individual companies, Jim's company, Todd's company, Eric's, and so on.
Right.
We thought what we'd do this time was something a bit different, which we hope would foster a more supportive and cooperative structure, and also prevent any sort of possible long-term creative fracturing. But the determination, simply put, was that we create Ghost Machine. Ghost Machine Incorporated owns all of the IP, and we own the company. So it's like all of the guys who created Batman and Superman and so on owning DC Comics. That was the setup. So if each of our successes in terms of the IP we create and how that develops outside of comics, and it will and is, all of those successes are shared by everybody. So if we're all successful, each of us is successful because of the other as well. So it won't just be, won't just all be living off Jay's success in creating Rook, or Gary's on Geiger, or Pete and Francis on Rockefellers. We're all contributing to the success of Ghost Machine, and we all benefit from the success of Ghost Machine. It is unlike anything any of us have ever experienced in our time in comics, or whether as freelancers, or in Pete's case and Geoff's case, as part of a corporation. Because, Geoff was president of DC Comics, chief creative officer at DC Comics. Pete had been a long-term editor at DC Comics and executive editor. So, they know that structure really well. And all of us prefer the way we're doing it now to the way we've ever done it before. So there really isn't a comparison in one respect, because nothing's ever been done the way we are doing it, both creatively and as a business model. It's completely different and completely new, both in the wider media like film and TV, and in the publishing media. Nobody's ever done it this way. So for all of us, I think we prefer how we're doing it for mostly the reasons I'm outlining, but we just all have such a great time doing it. We all get excited by each other's stuff. We're looking at some of the early stuff Francis is doing on Rockefellers. Mm-hmm. That's coming out in November. We're all gearing up for the Hyde Street and Horror Line launch with Hyde Street first, and Devour, the one shot with by Mytal in October. And they'll be out for the New York Comic Con. And that's our annual Ghost Machine week as well, where we get together before the New York Comic Con for a few days and just do the company stuff together and have a really great time. And we can't wait for that, because last year we were preparing and we announced Ghost Machine, but we were preparing for the launches of our actual books the following year. This year will be 7 issues or something, 7 or 8 issues into Geiger. Redcoat. Rook will probably be Jay will be gearing up for the launch of the second volume of Rook. We'll have Hyde Street and Devour coming out, and the launch of the Horror Line, which is extending beyond those books. And the following month we'll be launching the Family Odyssey line with Pete's 2 books initially, with Peter Schneeber and Francis Manapul on the Rockefellers, and they're terrific. They're really such good books. So we get excited. I get excited reading the next issue of Rook and Geiger when each of them have finished and we get the PDFs. I always get excited by those. I get excited by reading the reactions to their books. We're all really excited and inspired by the work everybody else is doing on these new books. Francis on Rockefellers is just terrific. Hornsby and Halo reads so well. It's just such a good book. So I there's no competition there in that way, except that we just all want to be as good as the other. We all want to think, oh, Gary's really stepped it up on this issue of Geiger. I think I'm going to have to try a bit harder. And then Rook comes out with all these huge tanks and trucks and these amazing splash pages, and you think, okay, I'm not trying hard enough still. So and I think that has been missing from my experience of working in comics for a long time, because everybody wants to be the most successful, have the best-selling book, because your royalties might be a few dollars higher any given month. Not that there's any royalties really in comics anymore anyway, but it's not competitive, it's supportive, it's inspiring. And I would say, if I haven't spoken enthusiastically enough about how much more of a positive experience what we're doing and how we're doing it is, I don't know how better to express it than just that.
Well, I'm really happy for you guys.
Thank you.
Like, genuinely, I mean, we get some of the benefits too, but you guys have all been involved in the comic book industry, and now you guys are getting to collaboratively be passionate together.
Yeah,
sounds really fun.
When we first got together as a whole company in October last year, prior to the New York Comic Con, I mean, I knew who Francis was. I'd met Gary 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I had never met Jay. Geoff and I had met a couple of times, and we'd been in touch, obviously, and we'd all been speaking. The 4 of us have been speaking a lot on Zoom and building up, to the creation of and the launch of the company. But the first time all of us got together in person, I don't think anybody quite knew what to expect. And what we didn't expect was what actually happened, which was just we all had the most amazingly transformative week, possibly because we're all pushing to this thing, coming together to do the announcement of the company, and it was a special thing for all of us. But I think because it was such a special thing for all of us for lots of different professional and personal reasons, we turned from a group of relative strangers into a genuine family. I remember when we got together, quite a chunk of us got together for the Orlando Con in January. We're all sitting around after the show or one of the days in the bar, and Pete just looks around and goes, "Yeah, I guess it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a one-off. We just wondered whether, I suppose all of us are thinking, would that, how we felt in October, genuinely, would it stick? Would it feel like it when we all got together? And it does. It just feels like you're getting together with family every time, and conversations are literally like somebody's just stepped out the door for 5 minutes, even if you haven't seen each other for months, and you just come back in because we know we're all connected, because we know we're all together as a unit, as a family, as a group. It's all you need when you go to the shows. It's just a happy group to be part of, and I think that was what none of us really expected to have happen. I think we knew we'd be able to be creatively successful, but nobody thought we were going to create what we have created in Ghost Machine, professionally and personally.
Well, that's certainly a fantastic way for us to wrap up this interview, sir. Thank you very, very much for giving us a window into your world there. And we do want to briefly touch on what we're going to do next episode, but from the bottom of our hearts, Bryan, and I'll let Snoggle gush over you for a minute as well. We do want to just say thank you very much for taking this hour of your time. The other night, I think I saw a post on Instagram where you were working into the night. So obviously your time is a hot commodity, and for you to give us some of it is something we truly appreciate. And obviously, that we love comic books and we love getting autographs from you folks and cool things that we can collect. But I want you to know that from the bottom of our heart, this conversation is much more valuable than any book or signature or item that we could ever obtain. So thank you truly for doing this. We really appreciate
it. That's genuinely appreciated.
Yes, this has been delightful. I like to sleep in, by the way, side note.
Me too.
So this was a delightful way to wake up in the morning, like just genuine, like good conversation. I really appreciate it. I think this has been just wonderful. And I already love Redcoat. One of our listener questions was, who would you be the sidekick for? And I said, obviously Redcoat. There's no other answer. Not like I don't love the other books, but I was like, how much fun would it be to be like just hanging out through history with Simon? But no, this has been a delight, and we really, really do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
We also wanted to you thought you might get a kick out of this. We, as you know, we do deep dives on our podcasts, and the next episode is going to be our Redcoat 3 deep dive, because we haven't been able to do that yet.
Okay.
Today we have you. And we wanted to let you know, Michael Schwartz, the author of Armored, I think you've heard of. He is connected with Geoff and a few other Ghost Machine creators. Mm-hmm. He's joining us for every Redcoat episode, and he's Canadian. So the reason that he's joining us is because he actually doesn't have a good grasp on American history. So he's getting it for the first time through the lens of Redcoat. So he's, there you go.
Everything in Redcoat is absolutely true.
There you go. You hear that, Michael? If Bryan Hitch said it, you have to believe it. Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight on the Ghost Machine Fans Podcast.
I can't.